and welcome to Green Cross Global Discusses. My name is Ross and I'm the Learning and Development Manager, Health and Wellbeing here at Green Cross Global. I'm delighted today to be joined by Tim Hassall, my wingman, Learning and Development Manager, Risk and Compliance. And today we're going to be talking about everything to do with compliance. We're going to be looking at regulations and realising that in fact compliance is not a dirty word. Tim, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ross. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Tim, what is compliance in health and safety? Can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Compliance in health and safety is about businesses meeting the health and safety guidelines that are laid down by the HSE. It's about having their policies and procedures in place to meet the minimum standard of the law in the UK, and ultimately it's about not hurting people.
So you talked about policies, you talked about the HSE. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, it's legal, legally laid down that if you employ more than 5 people in the workplace, you have to have a written health and safety policy. Now, a health and safety policy is your statement of intent. It's how you're actually going to run your business for day-to-day health and safety things, but also the emergency procedures. You would need procedures of operating machinery, procedures of how you're going to do safe systems of work. And that's what the guidelines or the regulations are asking you to do.
So you talked about the policy being written by a responsible person, a competent person, and in the HSE. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, about the person writing it?
That's a good question. I mean, it really depends on the size of the business. Every business obviously has the obligations to fulfill legal requirements. If it's a small business, the responsible person could write the policy. In larger businesses, they may go to the competent person to write their health and safety policies. And there's a big difference between the two. A responsible person is someone who has the ownership. So they're the site manager, they're the owner of the business. They have the responsibility to make sure that the policy's in place, that the controls stay in place, and that their health and safety day-to-day tasks are actually happening, whilst the competent person is the one that's had the training, has got the knowledge, he's got the skill and understanding to put what's necessary in place.
So we've discussed legally what compliance means and the involvement of policies and of the HSE. So, but for you, as an experienced health and safety consultant, what does compliance mean to you?
Compliance to me is the minimum standard. Compliance to me is actually a business has got its operational regulations, it's got safe systems of work, it's got its training, it's got its records. Compliance to me is about the minimum requirement for me to be able to show my due diligence. And due diligence is a defence if something goes wrong. Actually, it's about dotting the I's and crossing the T's. It's making sure what you say you are going to do, you're doing. Compliance to your own regulations, compliance to your own policies and procedures.
So you talked about this base level of compliance. Is that as a business where we should be aiming for, or really as businesses, should we be aiming for higher, and why?
Personally, for me, the base layer is just that. It's the legal standpoint. It's the line in the sand. The problem is if we only aim at the base level, what happens when it goes wrong? We'll dip below the law, which will open us up to prosecution. So you should always set your targets higher than the regulation. What it's actually saying must be, if it says you must do this, go a little bit further. Give yourself a little bit of a buffer room. So actually, when there is stretch in the business, some businesses really struggle in the summer because they become so busy. Some businesses really struggle come Christmas time. And by actually having that buffer, if it does go slightly awry, you don't fall below the law. So I'd always go put stretch onto the compliance.
Okay, so what we can agree on then from what you said is that really businesses should be above this baseline. But what are the benefits then for a business for them being compliant?
If you're compliant and your business is running top-notch health and safety, the business benefits are huge. You'll save time because you'll have less accidents, so you're not investigating. You'll save time interviewing people. Time is money. Businesses that have good compliance to health and safety are profitable. They have high morale. They have low turnover. They keep their experience. They have great reputations within the community. People want to do apprenticeships there. The list goes on. They've got decreased insurance premiums because they're not having the trouble that it comes when you've got poor compliance.
So obviously being compliant and having good compliance means that we can follow standards and get accreditation such as, ISO. Is that then therefore going to be beneficial to organisations as well?
Yeah, I mean, ISO 9001 as an example is the quality management system. And actually organisations that run quality management systems, there's 3 principles to a QMS. Number 1's great leadership. So great leadership that's active and being able to be visible and allows downward communication. So everyone in the business is hearing what they need to do. Second principle of a management system or a quality system is worker involvement. So actually we've got great leadership in the centre of everything, but we've got worker involvement. We're asking our workforce and informing them and taking advice from them. You think about risk assessments, actually talk to the person that's doing the task. So worker involvement. And then the third principle of a good management system is actually the review process. Actually seeing where we are, auditing, inspecting, monitoring, making sure that all the controls are in place. So aligning yourself with a QMS or ISO as an example, fundamental to great health and safety.
So from what you're saying, communication is really, really important and honesty, to be able to turn around and say, actually, there's something that's gone wrong, not bury our head in the sand. Is that beneficial as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The worst thing you can do in a business is close down your employees, your workforce. You need that honesty because if they get hurt or they have a near miss or some process isn't quite running correctly, you actually want them coming forward and saying, you need to know about this. If they don't talk to you or they try to hide it, things will go seriously wrong.
As a health and safety consultant, Tim, you visit lots of businesses. Obviously, not mention any names, but what common trends do you see in businesses that mean that they're not hitting this marker? They're not they're falling below the line of compliance.
It does vary from business to business, but there are some common trends. Number 1, I would suggest is organisations that think they can ignore health and safety when times are tough. So take COVID as an example. Businesses are in turmoil, people aren't working hours, we're short on staff, we're short on resource. It got really tight for people, and the first thing that seems to go is this culture of health and safety can go on the back burner. Oh, we were busy that day. And it's a great way of falling foul to the law when we put it on the back burner. So culture of not being able to maintain health and safety at peak times. Secondly, risk assessments that aren't suitable, they're not sufficient. They've not been written by a competent person, or they a business that hasn't taken into account a particular hazard. And then leading on the back of risk assessments will obviously give you control measures. And too often I go into a business and have a look and it says, we should be doing this, but they're not. So if they're writing it down and it's becoming a safe system of work or a way we're going to do something, they need to do it. That ties into leadership. It ties into supervising. A supervisor actually doing the job. Show me. Checking that those controls are in place. So poor supervising is a big one that I see. So culture, when it's on the back burner, risk assessments not delivering what they should do, supervisors not doing what they should do, and then the final big one for me is records. People's or businesses' records not showing the evidence that they've done what they said they were going to do. I said I was going to train Ross in a forklift truck. Well, where's Ross's certificate for the forklift truck? Where's the trainer's certificate? Where's our fire risk assessment? And it's tying all of that documentation and records together that is poor in a lot of businesses. And that's where software comes in to make it a lot easier for you.
Talk me through the process then, when it goes, unfortunately, when it goes wrong. You know, you've talked about the health and the safety executive timeline. What happens from an accident or an incident? Talk me through that process.
That's a really good question. Let's think about a business has had an accident. Let's say that accident is, let's not go life-changing, we won't be too pessimistic, but there's been a reportable accident. Reportable to the HSE because we have to put it on RIDDOR, Reporting of Injuries, Dangerous Occurrence Regulations. It goes on RIDDOR, you've now just put your head above the parapet to the HSE, we've had an accident, look at this. Obviously, if there's been an accident, you've got first aider involvement, you've got investigations that are going to happen, you've got all of the conversation and timeline and fact finding that goes on to try and get to the root cause. At that point, you'll get notification from the HSE. Now, it could be a phone call, could be an email, could be a knock on the door. And most of the time, they will come out and look at RIDDOR cases. So, you've had an accident, you've got an injured party in hospital, potentially. You've got his family or her family that are at unrest at the moment because one of them's not there. You've now got the HSE standing in front of you asking, how did this happen? Show me. And they will deep dive into everything relating to that incident. They've got a number of actions they can take. They can give advice. Advice is, you know, this is what you need to do. Great, you've done this bit, but please do this. They can issue you with an improvement notice, which can actually, you need to do this because you're in danger of breaching the law. And if you do breach the law, we'll take action. They can give you a prohibition notice, which shuts that part of your business down and means that production stops, everything stops in that particular area. It could be the whole premises. You know, both of those are appealable. You can put it in writing, but the prohibition notice doesn't hold off until the appeal's held. So if it's your building that's closed down, no one's working. You've then got the reputational impact, because I always had the HSE and community all get to know. The other action they've got, of course, is they can take you to court. And that'll happen fairly swiftly, within 6 months. And if it goes to court, you're on show. You're now having your day in court, and you will be scrutinised. You'll be put on the stand and quizzed. And if you've got something wrong or you haven't done, you'll be held accountable. And that actually means you can be fined. Lower courts, £20,000. Higher courts, unlimited. But it also means you can go to prison for 2 years. And that's not the person that necessarily wrote the risk assessment. That's actually the responsible person. That's the head of that organisation. Could be a director, it could be the owner. So the HSE, yeah, if they come in, they've got the rights that can actually cause you a lot of trouble. If your compliance isn't spot on, the stress that it brings to you is huge.
Through this conversation, we can see the positives, the benefits of a business being compliant. We've talked about communication. How do we get businesses to buy into this? How do we get them to adopt it, for it to become their culture?
The big thing about getting people on board is this communication. But it has to start with a business understanding where it is. So I go into businesses and deep dive into what they've got and what they haven't got, and we'll come out with a needs assessment. And that needs assessment can then form a strategy of how we're going to move culturally the health and safety forward. It can be mentoring people, it can be training people, it can be putting systems in place. One of the biggest things that you need to put good health and safety compliance in place are those three strands that I spoke about in that management system. Leadership that's visible, that's allowing downward communication, worker involvement, talking to your staff and actually getting upward communication. And then the third one is that performance review and take action. HSG 65. Plan, do, check and act. It's a continual cycle, and that's part of a management system.
So Tim, thank you very much for giving me your time today and talking about everything to do with compliance. I really have realised that compliance is indeed not a dirty word.
No, thank you.
And thank you for everybody for joining us, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. Goodbye.